Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the W6N1615, the successful model from W6 WERTARBEIT with a 10-year warranty. As you can see, this machine is labeled in German. However, the operating instructions are also available for download in English, and they include lots of images and figures for easy orientation. Here we have the spool pins. They are all metal for more stability. We have included 2 spool pins so that you can use twin needles with this machine. For threading, the machine here is neatly labeled with number 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Down here on the throat plate you see we have guided lines at 2, 1.5 and 1 centimeter distance. These lines are marked on both sides of the presser foot and indicate the distance to the needle. This makes sewing straight seams really easy. The extension table comes with a case for storing your accessories. It goes without saying that this model is also a free arm machine, which makes it easy for you to slide trouser legs or sleeves under the presser foot. And you see the parts where much wear occurs are made of metal. This model is a central bobbin looper machine, which is really extremely robust. That's why we grant a 10-year warranty. This is the button for backstitching. Up here you have an overview of the programs, the buttonhole automatic stitch, the wheels for stitch length and width. In order to obtain a neat stitching result, it's very important for the bobbin thread to be wound on properly and to correctly thread the machine. When unpacking the machine, you'll find these 2 pins in retracted position. Pull out one of the pins. This is your spool pin. Put the spool on it, and here is the tensioner for winding the bobbin. Use both hands to properly pull the thread between the tension discs. If you've done it right, the thread is a little taut. Wrap the thread around the bobbin a few times. You can also guide the thread through the hole in the bobbin from the inside to the outside, as described in the instructions. The important thing is to pull out the hand wheel, push the bobbin spindle to the right, and when you're ready, press the pedal and start winding. Just a quick check, that's all right there. Here we go. You can see that the bobbin thread is wound really tight. If this is not the case, please check again that the thread is properly guided in between the 2 tension discs. Wind up as much thread as you like or need. We don't need a full bobbin in our case. Push the bobbin spindle to the left and the hand wheel back in. The hand wheel is your coupling. It engages the sewing mechanism. If you only push the bobbin to the left and actuate the pedal without pushing in the hand wheel, only the motor will rev up, but the needle won't move. So remember to push the hand wheel back in to deactivate the winding mechanism and activate the sewing mechanism. Cut the thread. You can also use scissors if you have them on hand. Now insert the bobbin into the bobbin case. To do this, open this flap. Down here you have the bobbin case. And here's the wound bobbin. The thread must hang down at the right side of the bobbin. Now place the case onto the bobbin, and here you can see this little slit. Pull the thread through that slit around the tensioner until you hear it snap in place. Hold the case with both hands, insert it in the right position. I'm going to tilt this a little bit. There's a recess up here. This little arm must stick up and match the recess. Now click it in place. Snap. Now the case is in place and I can pull the thread without the case falling out. If you pull, you'll notice a slight tension. Next we need the top thread. Place the spool on the pin. Now hold the thread with one hand and with the other guide it through hook number 1. 1, 2, back to the top, 3 up here and down again to 4, and finally the left hook at number 5. Now cut off any fluffy bits of your thread. That's where the W6 embroidery scissors come in handy. It provides excellent value for money. Thread through the needle eye. And that's your top thread ready. Now it's very important to turn the hand wheel towards you 1 full turn. Always turn this way. I turn around once until the thread hook comes out at the top. Check if the hook is fully up by placing your little finger next to it. Your little finger and the thread hook must be approximately flush. Just grab both threads, pull them through the hole in the presser foot and to the back. Let's leave the extension table aside. I'll now start to show you a few things so you can see how robust the machine is. It doesn't have a 10-year warranty for nothing. Let's sew over a flat felt seam. I've got the leg of a pair of jeans here. Just put it under the foot. If you're sewing thick winter or specialty fabrics, please set the stitch length to 4, program A for straight stitching, and then your machine will sew over the thick bits quite easily. With thinner trouser or jeans fabrics, you can also set the stitch length to 3. But otherwise, please use 4. Regular cotton can also be sewn with stitch length 3 as mentioned. And you see the stitching is perfect. The machine didn't skip any stitches. Let's put the extension table back in place so that we have a larger sewing area. This makes it easier to guide the fabric. Now let's carry on. Since we have just used the straight stitch, I'll show you how to do top stitching close to the fabric edge. Included with the machine is a blind hem foot. At the machine you have a foot release lever back here. As soon as you press that lever, the foot is released. Then you can easily snap on any other foot you want. Place the new foot on the throat plate, lower the shank and the foot snaps on. The machine comes with different sewing programs, A, B and C for example. For my purpose I choose program B. On the stitch selector wheel you can see A, B, C and so on. A is for straight stitch with the needle in center position. If you set to B, that's also straight stitch but with the needle in left position. That means now I can top stitch really close to the fabric edge. Stitch length not too long. Look, and then it works out just fine. Turn the hand wheel again until the needle and the thread hook are in top position. Take the fabric out to the back. At the back of the shank there is an integrated thread cutter. Done. And there you see, the stitching is neat and super straight because we used the guide edge on the blind hem foot. So since we are already using the blind hem foot, let's try sewing a blind stitch. The foot's already in place. Blind stitch is program E. Just turn the wheel to E. The stitch length can remain at 2.5. The fabric must be folded. If this is the hem, I need to fold the fabric so that I'm basically stitching into the garment from the wrong side. Alright, put it under the foot, lower the foot and off we go. Now let's see what we've done here. Needle back to the top, thread hook fully to the top, take the fabric out, cut off the threads. Here you can see we really did a good job there, and on the right side of the garment you can barely notice any stitching. It's a perfectly easy thing to do. The next thing we want to do is some applique work, for example. First we need 2 pieces of fabric. We can use the same program as before, but we have to change the foot. For this we use our regular presser foot. That snaps in. Now we want to applique the blue fabric onto the white one. As I just said, we'll stick with program E, but we choose a much smaller stitch length. Let's see if this works out. That's one option. It looks a bit like hand applique work. The other option is the classical method, a simple zigzag stitch. I'll leave the stitch length as it is. So of course you have to catch the edge of the applique fabric, then that works out just fine. Let's compare the results. After all, they're next to each other. This is the classical method, a simple zigzag, and this is the applique or blind stitch, which looks a bit different, but not bad at all. Both work, both look neat. The next thing I want to show you is how to mend tears or the like. For that purpose you can use program D, triple zigzag. Just turn the wheel to D. The important thing is to choose a short stitch length. So what we need now is a piece of torn fabric and another piece of fabric that you place underneath the tear. Put the torn piece on top of the intact piece of fabric. Place everything under the presser foot and press the pedal to start sewing. The machine sews 3 stitches to the right and 3 stitches to the left. In this way, the tear in your fabric is neatly closed. The important thing is that you always use a scrap under the torn area. Otherwise, the stitching is not stable and it'll easier tear again. So let's take that out and have a look. Looks super neat and you have saved a garment. It doesn't have to be your best silk dress. If you think about it, you can easily do some mending yourself now. And you don't have to repeatedly spend much money at an alterations and repair shop. This means that the machine actually pays off relatively quickly. Now, if you want to sew stretch fabrics, remember a few things. It's important to use super stretch needles from W6, and of course you need to set the right program, otherwise it won't work. If you use a regular straight stitch on stretch fabric, the stitching looks nice. So, you're all happy, you're done. Everything seems correct. But then there's a big problem. If you want to put on your garment and pull it over your head, for example, the thread snaps and the seam is broken. what went wrong? One thing you need to remember, use super stretch needles. We already had one installed, one from W6. Now, for sewing a straight stitch on stretch fabric, you choose program A, but you need the red version of A for stretch fabrics. This means you have to set the stitch length selector to stretch stitch. The regular stitches for woven fabrics are indicated in gray, and the stitches for stretchy fabrics are indicated in red on the machine. With this program, the machine sews back and forth 3 times in one operation, which results in a stretchy seam. That does take a little longer to sew, but it's also very effective. So let's take a look at it. Turn the thread hook back up, take your fabric out, cut the threads. Now you can see that this is really giving away. With this stitch you can also do something else. You can use it to simulate an original jeans seams or sewing crotch seams on trousers. You don't have to comb the shops or the internet for thick thread that isn't available in the right color anyway. Just use your regular sewing thread, the thread stitch and the thread stitch setting. It will look like you worked with a thick thread. This option is also perfect for sewing crotch seams, which need to be super stable and lasting. Okay, let's take a look. See. It looks really good, and if you give it a stress test, well, it's hard to tear, almost impossible. What else can our machine do? So the machine can also do an overlock seam. That means you sew and overcast the fabric in one step. Use program G and make sure you have set the stitch length to stretch. Stretch is still set from before. Turn to G and then you can sew a neat overlock seam. If there are any loose threads on your fabric, cut them off before sewing. This is to make sure the finished stitching looks neat. Put it under your presser foot and start sewing. The machine is mainly sewing on the left and moves over to the right every few stitches. In the past, both sides of the seam allowance had to be finished with a zigzag and then sewn together. That was 3 different steps. With this option, you now can do all 3 steps in one. The needle is already in top position. You see, this is the stitching line and this is the finished edge. When you turn the right side out, you see it looks nice and tidy. The machine is equipped with a 4-step buttonhole sewing program. So let's try that out. The steps are depicted up here. Step 1 to 4. Do all 4 steps to close the buttonhole. We start at 1 in forward direction. Set the stitch length to 0.5 approximately. Change the foot. This is the buttonhole foot, and for automatic buttonholes we need to use that. Release the previous foot and snap on the buttonhole foot. Now the thread. It's best to stick it through the foot and to the back. When sewing a buttonhole, you always have 2 layers of fabric, and you also need to use interfacing between the fabric layers. This means that for each buttonhole, also use a piece of interfacing to stabilize the area. And what is really important, use interfacing or backing for stretch materials. If you are sewing stretch fabrics, you'll notice that the material stretches under the presser foot. Therefore, always use embroidery stabilizer or interfacing. Your stitching will be much neater and you won't have to iron your fabric that much. We start at 1. The machine sews forwards in a narrow zigzag. If you find the stitching to be too narrow, you can adjust it to a wider zigzag while sewing. The length of the buttonhole depends on the size of the button. Mark that on your fabric before sewing. You stop at the end, turn the needle up until the thread hook is up. Turn to 2 to make a bar tack. Just do 3 or 4 stitches, not too many. Then switch to 3 and the machine will sew backwards, all the way to the back. Nothing can go wrong, it will sew up to the end of the foot. Then set to 4. 2 and 4 is the same program. The machine closes the buttonhole at the back and that's that. Take your fabric out, cut the threads and admire your result. Now you can cut the buttonhole open with a seam ripper. The seam ripper is included with the machine. We've just sewn a buttonhole. Now we must also be able to sew on a button. This plate is supplied with the machine. It covers the feed dog. This means that you cover your feed dog so that the button to be sewn will not be transported to the back. Let's take a piece of fabric and try that out. And of course you need a button. Place the button onto your fabric. We don't use a presser foot. The button is held in place by the shank. Please set the machine to zigzag with a medium stitch width. The stitch length is not important. Before you start sewing, turn the hand wheel to check that the needle goes through the holes of the button. See, that's not wide enough, so a little wider. In there and in there. Now you see we've almost reached full width, almost 3/4 for this button. Press the pedal. That works just fine. Done. Take up the needle and the thread hook to the top, take out the fabric, cut the threads and finished. Just secure the threads and your button is firmly sewn on. The sewing machine is also capable of sewing with twin needles. As I said at the beginning, it comes with 2 spool pins. We have a spool on 1 pin already. The first thing I'll now do is to change the needle to a twin needle. The flat side of the needle shank must face backwards and make sure to push the needle upwards to the stop. Many people don't remember to push the needle all the way up. It happens that people send in machines for us to repair them in the workshop. Then we find that the needle hasn't been installed properly. We just fix that and return the machines to our customers. Now, that's something you can avoid. You can prevent that by always pushing in the needle all the way up. For a twin seam, you need to thread a second thread for the twin needle. That means you place a second spool of thread onto the second spool pin. Thread it in the same way as the first. There's no difference at all. Just stop before the needle. Now the first thread goes through the left hook and the second thread goes through the right hook. Then just thread the needles accordingly, through the needle eye, like this, and guide the threads to the back. What kind of setting do you need? You definitely need to use straight stitch. Please do not set to zigzag or any other stitch. When working with twin needles on this machine, the program must always be A for straight stitch and the stitch length must be set to 3. In addition, I recommend reducing the thread tension a bit, otherwise the fabric will pucker and you want your stitching to be neat and tidy. With these settings, you can stitch up a twin seam without any problems. That's it. Let's take a look. This is what it looks like on the right side, and this is the wrong side. I sewed a little bit too far in here at the bottom. The top bit here is perfect. Ideally, the stitching should line up with edge on the fabric. But you can also sew it like this and cut off any excess. Another important thing, when using stretch fabrics, always remember to use the correct needles, that's to say super stretch, and make sure to use some interfacing or backing fabric. In my case, I went without, because the fabric was sturdy enough. If your fabric is extremely thin, please always use something to stabilize the stitching. That will prevent the fabric from creasing and puckering, and your garment will look really neat.